Hello and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. My guest this time is Breeda Bermingham. She's an award-winning menopause coach on a mission to change the global story for menopausal and midlife women. She went back to study psychology and got a sociology master's in 2020, and her research interest is midlife women, menopause and leadership. She coaches women individually and in group settings, focusing on symptom management and the positive aspects of the menopause transition. She's a staunch believer that the taboo around menopause continues to limit and disempower women in their middle years and needs to be removed in order to enable women to thrive. She's also the best-selling author of Midlife Women Rock, a menopause story for a new generation. Welcome to the podcast, Breeda.
Hello, Emma. Just great to be here. Thank you.
What sort of pushed you to go back to study in 2018? Was that, were your sort of children grown up at that point?
Yes, I suppose, Emma, I went back actually in 2015. I was 49 and my youngest had just turned 10, and I'd been at home for over 10 years after he was born. I have 4 children, and I suppose for a long time I'd been wanting to go back and study psychology. So the opportunity arose in 14, 15, and I went back and I completed the degree in 2018, and this is where I was led to look into midlife women and menopause, because I was reviewing the research on midlife women, and menopause, of course, is a huge part of the story around midlife. And what perplexed me was there was so little information around this stage in life, plus the information and the research I did get my hands on was hugely negative, like narratives around degeneration, heading downhill, becoming invisible. And I'm a former midwife and a community nurse, and I've worked with women for years. And the thing is, I've been lucky enough to work across the socioeconomic divide. So women are prepared and they're educated around issues in their lives. I had seen how they can thrive, and I came upon menopause and I wondered what had happened that this story was so negative, and what had happened that nobody was talking about it. Why was there so much silence, even amongst my own friends, colleagues? So that's where I started.
Yeah, it's obviously in the sort of the intervening 4, 5, 6 years since you started studying it, a lot has changed, but at the same time, it does still feel like there's an amount of stigma and taboo around the topic that we still need to break down, and that's part of what you're doing with your work now.
Yes, and I mean the taboo. Again, from my own research, I did the degree I finished the degree in psychology. I started working then in the space in 2019. I was met with a wall of silence in many in many areas of life back then. And I remember going to the Meg Matthews Menopause Conference in London in May 2019, and that was the first conference organised by women for women. And what was quite unique about it was on the day, Meg Matthews mentioned that 70 to 75% of us that attended alone. And this is what happens around taboo subjects. And I suppose my research revolved, and the book that I've written revolves around shame, and Brené Brown's work, the social scientist. You may have heard of her, Emma. Yeah, her lens looking at menopause and looking at the shame that has been associated with menopausal women over the decades. And when shame is attached to a subject, there's always going to be silence and conformity. And certainly where menopause is concerned, I found there to be huge silence, fear, denial, stigma that has been passed down through the generations. And what I also discovered is that, in the past, women did actually try to break this silence. Germaine Greer, back in the 1980s, that author and feminist, she tried to bring menopause mainstream with very little success. In the 1990s, Gail Sheedy, an American author, did a lot of work around the silent passage. She was asking, why is menopause and silence, why are they bedfellows? And again, she endeavoured to try and bring it mainstream without success. there's a great story in Gail Sheedy's book, The Silent Passage, around Oprah Winfrey trying to get an audience into the studio to talk about menopause in the mid-90s, and finding it impossible to get women to actually speak
Just
about
like,
it.
no way.
So we are the generation, Emma, I believe there's something has happened in the last, the last few years, and is happening at the moment, because I feel, and from working in the space and also being a researcher, we are going to be the women that are actually going to break
Mm.
that silence and bring menopause mainstream.
Why,
And
why do you think that is? What is it that's different about this sort of group of us who are going through this experience now?
well, actually, there are kind of three big reasons I feel that menopause is coming into, it's coming into the main media and it's becoming mainstream. Number one, it's demographics. It's the number of us, because
Hmm.
today globally, women entering and moving through their 50s, they account for the highest demographic who are in the workplace, and we're also educated. Women in their 50s today compared to previous generations, there are more and more of us that are educated. So we've got voices, and women are starting to use their voices, and it's the collaboration of many, and that's what's making the shift. There are so many of us. I mean, I'm in Ireland. There are quite a number of us here in Ireland. We've been advocating since 2019-20 here when it comes to government changes and policy change. The UK are leading the world when it comes to this shift, because I have a lot
Mm.
of contacts in America and in Australia, South Africa, and they're looking to the UK and Ireland and wondering, how are we doing what we are doing? So it's quite exciting in many ways, Emma, what's actually happening, because we're uncovering decades and decades of silence.
Mm. It's a tipping point. They talk about the tipping point actually in things like the climate change movement, don't they? It's just like if
Yes,
you get to a certain
yes,
percentage of behaviour change, then
yeah.
it will tip over into the sort of the general population.
Yes, and life expectancy is another reason why we're talking and speaking up now. If you go back 100 years ago, I mean, life expectancy for women was approximately like 58, 59. The CSO statistics. Today, life expectancy, our mid 80s. So there's a lot of living to be done post menopause compared to 100 years ago. And that's where that story of menopause and old, because most women back in 1910, I saw here in Ireland, they reached menopause at, they were actually older. It was 56 was the average age a woman reached menopause back in 1910. And the average age a woman
Ah.
lived to was like 58, 59. So that's where that story of you're old and you're menopausal. But this is 2022, and we're certainly not old by the time we reach the average woman in the Western world reaches menopause at 51. We're talking about another 35, 40 years, provided we've good health. So that's another reason why the shift is occurring. But it's the voices of women. It's the accumulation of the many voices, doctors, educators, coaches, and it's a movement. Let's say from having worked in the UK as well over the last few years, it's like this midlife women's movement that women have voices, and they're starting to use the voice around, we are of value in society. Forbes, let's say that economic think tank in 2019, they estimate that the economic costs, let's say, to health and also to productivity globally is over 810 million in not managing and not supporting menopausal women in the workplace.
And a lot of the conversation, certainly here in the UK and on social media, is very focused on HRT. But obviously, that's not the whole picture. And for some people, they won't be able to take HRT, or they won't necessarily want to take HRT. And so, sometimes we're perhaps so kind of focused on the sort of the symptoms and treatment that we forget the bigger picture of this as a life transition. So can you talk a bit about the work that you do in that sort of space in terms of being such a more sort of holistic view of menopause?
And I agree. I have been following, let's say, in the last year in particular, what has been happening in the UK. And when it comes to symptom management, I mean, I write about this in my book. I see menopause as this huge puzzle, and we still do not have all the pieces of the puzzle. And the reason we don't have the pieces is because menopause has been in the closet for so long. We haven't taken it out, we haven't examined it, we haven't put it under the spotlight, but we're starting to do so. And we're looking at such, great things that are beginning to happen. Like there's a new drug that's been tried for the last 2 or 3 years that's coming onto the market in 2023, specifically for women who cannot take estrogen. Post-cancer treatment, which is very, very promising, because I work with a lot of women, let's say, who've had breast cancer, and HRT is certainly not recommended there. When it comes to hormone replacement therapy, my belief is that it's about informed choice. I think women deserve to know that, that this is one of the management pathways,
Yeah.
when it comes to managing symptoms. But there are also lifestyle changes which are imperative, and also complementary alternative. And it's about informed choice. There are many women who want to take HRT, and that is wonderful. But there are also many women who want to choose the alternative routes. And I believe women are not stupid. Women, provide us with the information and education, and we decide for ourselves. That's my belief from working with women for years. In Ireland, we, I suppose, as a country, we have had the Women's Health Task Force was set up here in 2019. Set up, I suppose, Vicky Phelan. She's a cervical check campaigner who unfortunately passed away only in the last 2 weeks.
I saw
She
that.
was, yeah, she was responsible. She was instrumental in getting this set up in the Department of Health here in Ireland. And in February 2020, the department invited those of us working in the women's health areas to come into the department and provide our feedback on what we felt was important when it came to, I was the menopause space. Let's say there were people talking about mental health, endometriosis, infertility, but there were four of us who were voicing our concerns about the huge lack of education, awareness, signposting of supports, and availability of support in Ireland. And they took it on board that day. Then COVID came along, 2020-21. But it's this year now that the government are actually enacting what they had promised. So they've opened up 4 menopause medical centres here in Ireland in the last year, government funded. And we also, in October, they have just launched a nationwide education and awareness campaign, whereby we've billboards, buses, videos, in order to try and get the whole of society talking about menopause. And I personally feel that this is going to be a game changer for bringing menopause mainstream, with the objective being that we eventually talk about it like we do pregnancy, in workplaces, in
Yeah.
homes, and normalize the conversation. That's where I feel, from wearing my sociologist hat, this is where we need to go, because it's so much bigger than HRT, what's happening at the minute. It's about the value of women when they reach the end of their reproductive years. And this invisibility narrative has been there, it's been handed down to us, and we are the women that are going to change that for the next generation. I have 2 daughters. I certainly would like them to come into menopause without that fear, shame, and denial that I encountered when I landed in the space. And Emma, I myself was perimenopausal back in 2018-19 without I even realizing it. I didn't realize, until I started researching that I was putting on weight. I had this awful body odor, and I wondered, what the heck was this all about? My menstrual cycle was still very regular, but I was perimenopausal, and I'd never heard the word before 2018. So the lack of education has been, it's like this black hole that we're starting to fill in. We're filling in this hole, and so that our younger sisters and our daughters and our granddaughters, when they come, they'll be prepared, they'll be educated. And I've seen, the huge benefits that education and sharing stories, in particular, the power of women sharing stories. And that's another problem that has existed in menopause. Women's voices have not really been heard in the story around menopause. in the research, let's say going pre-2015, most of the research around menopause is medical research. It's medical doctors writing for other doctors or writing for professors, and they're talking about, the consequences of severe symptoms. So they're not talking about, what a natural menopause can be like. There has been a huge deficit there around women's voices talking about what has happened or how they've managed, how they've negotiated and navigated through the silence. It's amazing, Emma. I'm sure the UK are similar. How women here in Ireland have told me they've done 4 and 5 hours in a car just to hear someone talking about menopause, let's say going back to 2016, 17, looking for information.
And I think that's so important as well, that we hear that broad range of experience, because some of the time we might, for example, newspaper articles might focus on particularly sort of extreme cases, or the experiences of a sort of celebrity who, it's great that they're standing up and talking about it, but we really need to see and understand that, as you've already said, everyone's experience is going to be different. Some may really only experience fairly mild symptoms and, sort of, as we say, sort of sail through it without a backwards glance. Some people are going to be really debilitated and going to want to use every sort of tool in that toolkit to help them kind of get through and out the other side. Some people, are going to be experiencing symptoms for years. Some will not. And so I think it's important as well that we hear some positive experiences and stories.
Yes, and Emma, looking at the statistics, I mean, if we take into account, let's say, that we've had no preparation, we've had no education, and we've had no signposting of support, and the stats going back to when I was doing my research in 2018-19 were that 20% of women have no symptoms. The remaining 80% then have symptoms ranging from mild, moderate to severe. There's about 20 to 25% who have the severe symptoms who they need medical management through those years that they're moving through. But I would say there's 60% of women who manage menopause quite successfully, with with information, with knowledge, and maybe with one or two trips to their GP over the years that they're going through perimenopause, menopause. I would estimate that there's 60% of women. Now, I don't know if everybody would agree with me on that, but that's from I working with hundreds of women in the last 4 years. And it's been that gap in education, gap in, signposting and understanding what is going on and what's actually happening to us. That is causing the issues. If we can put the education in place, explain, what perimenopause is, the psychological, the emotional, the physical symptoms, we can reduce that 20 to 25% of women who have those severe symptoms, and encourage, more and more supports to start emerging for that, and early menopause in particular. And it's great to see Professor Nick Panay lead a group of researchers looking into early menopause and how best to support young girls and young women with premature ovarian insufficiency and premature ovarian failure, because there's been so much loneliness and isolation in their lives. I've heard from individuals. So that's where I think the story has, I suppose, we're uncovering the silence, and in uncovering it, then there's turbulence, and that's where I think in the last year in the UK there's been a lot of turbulence around the huge focus on HRT. Yes, it is really important, and it's a wonderful treatment if it suits an individual, but it's not for everybody. And the actual story here is bigger than HRT, what's actually happening around menopause. It's about the role and the value of midlife women in society, in communities, and in the workplace.
You've talked a bit before about, working across different socioeconomic groups, different demographics. It's quite often seems as though a lot of the voices that we do hear in this space are kind of more in that professional women demographic, how do we make sure that we're reaching people who don't sit in that box?
Okay, yeah, that is a great question. Well, I think social media probably, and the newspapers, the news readers, let's say, starting to talk more and more about the subject. That's breaking down the taboo and getting conversations going. And I run the Midlife Women Rock cafes here. They're a non-profit here in Waterford, where groups of women come together on the first Tuesday of each month, and they're free. I facilitate the cafes. I provide information. They come with their questions, but most of all, it's women to women support. It's the power I've seen in it. This has been going on since 2019. We were on line on Zoom throughout COVID, but it's the power of women to women support. That
You're
is,
not alone.
yeah, exactly. And when women realize, oh my goodness, that there's another woman experiencing this symptom that I thought I was the only one experiencing, it's such a massive relief. It kind of, depersonalizes the symptom from who they are as women. Because sadly, the story, let's say in the past, was if you were presenting with a symptom, for example, social anxiety is something that I have come upon again and again in older women, and
Mm-hmm.
they feel that once they become anxious, that there's nothing they can do about it. Or insomnia, sleep disturbances, again in older women who've lost good sleep in their middle years when they're moving through menopause, and they felt, oh, it's something we'd have to put up with for the rest of our lives. And these are all the good things that are happening as a result of us bringing menopause mainstream. That women realize, that they've got agency now. This is the came up in my own research, was the lack of agency, which is completely understandable, because I was one of these women. Even though I am a midwife, I'm a nurse, my background, I did not know what was happening or what was going on. And I'm perplexed even to this day to how long we've stayed silent as women.
Yeah, well, it's crazy when you think that we're all going to go through this, and yet it's only really in the last few years that we've sort of really succeeded in getting it out in the open. I
Mm.
wanted to ask you about that sort of shame and taboo in the workplace, and sort of the more that I dig into this, I suppose I can see that for some people, sharing their struggle whilst they're at work is something that feels a little bit scary and difficult, because they don't want to be judged and found lacking in a work environment. How do we get around that?
Emma, I think courage is the word, and courageous women is what I call these women. As I say, I've been going into workplaces now over the last year here in Ireland, and also on webinars in the UK. But I call these women massively courageous. These are kind of the warrior women that are actually changing the story, and they're changing the workplace for other women.
Trailblazers.
Yeah, in many ways, and even in the last few weeks, I've been in companies here in Ireland and organisations, and it only takes one woman to actually break the ice. And so many other women have told me this. They've said, because Angela started talking, we now are all talking. Because Julie
Mm.
started talking, we now are talking at coffee breaks, and we're sharing what's working for me, where to go, let's say, to find a GP who's really educated on menopause, where to go to maybe visit a menopause coach, a menopause nutritionist. Another person was talking about CBT. So, it's that sharing how women, and I keep saying this in all of my talk, it's talking. And I heard actually Professor Nick Panny on Menopause Awareness Month saying that he was asked, what has made the biggest difference in the last 4 to 5 years around menopause in the UK? And he said it's the fact that more and more of us are talking openly and publicly about it. That,
Normalizing that conversation. So the more and more of us that we can do that, the more, as you say, it just becomes part of our everyday.
We're uncovering this story in order to kind of recover and then to see these opportunities, second chances, because that's where I'm moving to. In Ireland, we've got the campaign here, we've got the menopause medical clinics. So, with this shift, this uncovering has occurred now, I feel. So it's time now to move to the next. We've got to shift again, and to shift towards looking at the opportunities, second chances, access to deep creative power, and access to these positives that are actually in the literature, they're in the research, but we need to spotlight them now a little bit more, because 95%, Emma, of everything that has been written about menopause is negative. The language has been overwhelmingly negative that has been handed down to us through the generations. And there's a great paper, Killer Whales, Killer Women, written by an Australian academic in 2019, I think it was 1919 or 2020, but I love the title of it. And her question to the world is like looking at what is the role of the post-menopausal woman in society, and she believes it's leadership. It's actually that we have this innate leadership ability within us that comes to the fore once our hormones start, those lovely nurturing hormones start to decline, and it's like a recalibration, a refocus. Like we're looking after everybody else as women or as mothers, whether we have children or not. We're looking after maybe parents. But when we come to menopause and our fertile reproductive years end, our focus then changes as women. And this is a new story because we're living longer. And this is the story that needs to come into the world because we're living longer as women. So it's the value we bring, this access to a creative power, which I am meeting women every week who are telling me now that they are tapping into this ability to
I
speak
love
up.
it. We need more of those stories, more of that narrative.
And I mean, Emma, 10 years ago, I would not be doing what I'm doing today. I'm quite introverted, but it was an injustice around the research and also, I suppose, anger that drove me to start doing what I'm doing in talking about menopause. When I was talking to my friends back in 2019, one of them, it was so funny, she said to me, Breeda, could you not have chosen another subject? Nobody's going to talk to you about menopause. And I always
Well, I'm glad
remember.
she was wrong.
Exactly. Wrote the book from a sense of, as I said, from the injustice that was there, that I myself had no information. So the book was written for everyday women. We are a new generation of women, and I specifically used positive language because I had discovered that most of what is written about menopause is negative. So it's around I think power is another huge narrative that's coming out, and the lack of power, the lack of agency that we have had as women coming into this phase of our lives that thankfully is changing dramatically. But the story is bigger, as I said, the story is bigger than HRT. It's about this societal and cultural change that is happening, and the value that society is now starting. We're only starting, I think, to engage with around midlife women.
Well, we're definitely an aging workforce, aren't we? So, yeah, woe betide, I guess, any employer that undervalues.
Women age 50 and over are the fastest growing cohort within the workplace. You see, even though, we can say aging and we have all these negative connotations with aging, but women age 50 and over are the fastest. There are more and more returners to the workplace now because of the fact that we're living longer, and governments and societies need us. The economic, from an economic perspective,
Mm.
we are needed, and this is why it's so important to provide supports within workplaces in order to retain and support women. And another big issue is around promotion. I was doing a talk here in Ireland recently for school principals and vice principals, and they were just saying, it's encouraging women to step up. And what has gone on that women are not stepping up in their 40s and 50s. And I think
Mm,
that's correlated to that confidence dip that we all, I would say we all, or a huge majority of women experience coming into perimenopause when, if we have a lot of symptoms or we're unsure of what's happening, courage and confidence can dip, but it's only temporary. I always explain to women it's about maybe taking a little bit of time out, getting your symptoms under control and realizing that you're still the strong woman you always were.
mm. And that it's
Um,
perfectly normal, and many of us are going through the same thing. It's, again,
yes,
you're not alone. It's not just you. It's going to be
yes,
okay.
yeah, yeah. But it's that shame. That word, that shame, and Brown's book or work really resonated with me because I feel, having worked in the space over the last 4 years, yeah, the shaming of the menopausal woman in society is something that we really have to tackle. And that's where I love where the brands now are all coming on board. So, I mean, for such a long time, we were ignored. Once you got to 50, you were kind of ignored when it came to brands
Mm,
actually looking at, your hair, makeup, clothes. So, and I mean, we're huge, we're earners, we're big earners in society. So I'm amazed it's taken the brand so long to actually come on board.
yeah, me
And
too.
yeah, yeah,
Better late than never.
yes, yes. So that's another arm of it, the branding. So that, and it's wonderful to see big companies, Boots, Number Seven, all coming in, Pantene, L'Oreal. We need that again because the story is bigger than just HRT. It's about this cultural change that we're living through at the minute, and it's very, very exciting to be working in the space. I'm sure you found that from interviewing lots of different women. And there will be turbulence, Emma. Societal and cultural change is not easy and it's also very slow, but it is happening.
Yeah, I'd love to just look 20 years into the future, and sort of have a sneak peek at how what the narrative looks like down the road. Well, hopefully I'll still be around. But yeah, I'm turning 50 next month, and I definitely don't feel old and
Oh,
past
well,
it.
well, yeah,
So
absolutely. And I think, I mean, embrace your 50s and in particular your 50th year. I celebrated throughout the whole year when I turned 50. I'm 56 now, so I'm post menopause, by clinical definition once you're, but again, this again is all arbitrary, really. Once your menstrual cycle stops and then you have a year, this is the medical definition of it. But I would say, for a year after that, I still would have had symptoms, and I had a lot of anger, irritability, and again, because I had access to going into the research, I was really interested in finding out what's this about, what's this anger about. And there's a chapter of it in my book, and it's really important, I think, for women to understand about anger. And there's actually a positive reason.
it can drive us forward.
Yeah, and as well as the oxytocin, as well as the estrogen, those nurturing, lovely nurturing hormones that are starting to drop in our bodies, and we suddenly are kind of feeling a lot more anger. Again, it's temporary; it doesn't last, but just to be aware of it because it's very frightening for a lot of women.
My husband
So
will be very glad to hear that.
yeah, yeah, and just to have the conversations.
Like,
Yeah,
hang in there, dude. It's going
yeah,
to be all
because
right.
it's your nearest and dearest, unfortunately, that that experience the result of that anger. But it's that education deficit. I think at the end of the day,
Mm.
that has caused a lot of the issues for women and a lot of the crisis that we've landed in.
No, I often say the same to people. It's like having that understanding and being empowered with the tools to help us. You're kind of half the way there.
And I saw I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. There was it last week. Sue, one of the women, she was talking about being menopausal, just as kind of a throwaway comment, and nobody said it was just so natural for her to come out and
Mm.
say, "Oh, I'm menopausal." Or there was a newsreader in America, and she was mentioning to her colleague, who was a male colleague, that she uses magnesium as a great way for managing her menopausal symptoms, and this is where we need to go. This is where it's the normalizing of menopause, which has been, so filled with taboo, shame, and stigma for so long. that's where we
Definitely. Well, that's thank you for your book and the great work that you're doing. That is, it's all helping us move in the right direction. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. And yeah, I'll pop a link to your website and to find out more about the book into the show notes for this episode.
Lovely, Emma. Thank you so much again, and let's keep talking.
You've been listening to the Middling Along podcast. Do remember to subscribe to be notified when our next episode is live. And why not visit the blog at www.midlingalong.com to sign up to my newsletter as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening today. If you did, I'd be really grateful if you would consider leaving a short review, as that helps people find the podcast and helps get it noticed. Hope you can join us next time. Goodbye for now.